Michelle?
Daniel,
OG
OG Rose, and tonight we are sitting outside because it's a full moon. It's very pretty, and we are discussing the upcoming course at Parallax on Ivan Illich and tools of conviviality. It is a tricky word, but it's an interesting word how he defends it in his book, and we are just discussing what the class is and how we think about it and why we're interested to do it. And Michelle, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so very excited about the course and thankful for the opportunity at Parallax. We hope that you guys will consider taking the course.
Absolutely.
And yeah, I think I'm one of the reasons why I'm excited about it is because it really is I think Illich's work really touches on things that are really in line with what I think about a lot in terms of just like, and maybe that, but it is the case that I tend to think about, some of the questions or some of the concerns that he brings up, or some of the considerations, I want to say, for how technology changes our reality, how it changes our towardness. And I think that it will be really exciting to be able to dive into those things as related to our own work as well.
Yeah.
I get a chance to share that.
Yeah, I mean, there is this, in the course description we talk about replacing humanity versus extending humanity and what technology does which. And I think the other thing that I think is so important today is these really fine distinctions between, say, using technology that extends humanity versus replaces it. Mm-hmm. And not only are the distinctions fine, nobody thinks they make these mistakes.
What do you mean by that?
Nobody thinks that they're replaced by their technology. Like the distinctions
between...
they're
fine distinctions.
Yeah, fine
particular
distinctions. Yeah, they're very particular. And in addition to that, it seems very natural to kind of assume you get it right, or to see yourself as getting it right.
Yeah.
And so not only is there a question of how to relate to technology, but also how to pay attention to yourself. Because if we're going to say that there's something about tools that extends humanity, well, we have to know what humanity is, we have to be able to see it, we have to be able to identify it, and we have to be able to tell when it is extended. And I mean, that gets into that when we talk about bestocentrism with Nietzsche, right? Like for Nietzsche, there's a difference between having your religion bestow upon you, say, your worldview, as opposed to religion being something you participate in according to your own values and self-turning wheel, right? Now, of course, there's a risk there of becoming someone completely untethered to reality and religion and just transforming the religion into your own version. But what he's getting at is what Nietzsche's pointing at is, I think, similar to disablement in Ivan Illich, where Ivan Illich is so concerned that we're disabled today because we get everything from systems. Likewise, we get our identities and directions from, say, religion. But again, as we talk about in that paper in the Philosophy Portal Anthology, it wasn't just religion that Nietzsche was concerned about. He was concerned about nationalism, science, pragmatism, all of these things that could bestow upon us direction without us choosing anything for ourselves. And so, if we're going to not be disabled by something that bestows direction on us, or disabled by a system, or disabled by technology, well, you kind of have to be able to tell when that is occurring. And furthermore, if you're disabled, you might even be disabled from telling that you're disabled, kind of ending up in a Simone Weil affliction. Because that's the problem. Like if following Nietzsche again, if you're dependent on bestowing, then you almost need the system bestowing you to tell you that you're dependent on bestowing to recognize it. And I think that's something that's very interesting too about Ivan Illich, is that when he's critiquing systems, whether it be education, technology, medical, wage labor today versus shadow work, as he talks about it, he's talking about things in such a way that it's kind of alien when you encounter it, because if you're in the system, you can't really see anything except according to what the system allows. And so he's almost bringing an alien world to you that you've got to be able to, one, be open to even receive. But if you take it seriously, I think, the very thing that you can kind of learn as an overarching point from Ivan Illich is precisely that you can be brought into a system that makes everything outside of it invisible. And I think technology can do that. And how do we keep technology from doing that? How do we keep our ideas of what it means to be educated from doing that to us? What it means to be healthy, what it means to be successful. Like, you have to be able to see what you don't even know you can't see. And that's very tricky, but I think the trickiness of that is one of the reasons why Ivan Illich has been overlooked, but also precisely why today he's so important, especially if we're suffering, manipulation by the algorithms, ontological, this ontological warfare that Daniel Frege talks about, this thinker that's able to see what isn't seen, and to train you to kind of keep your eyes on the lookout for things you don't even know you need to be on the lookout for. Though I think that's all very relevant.
Yeah, definitely. To go back to that point about not, say with technology, nobody thinks that they're using it to replace themselves or humanity, right? Versus extend in the sense of oh, I can reach a little higher because of technology, right? A ladder is a technology.
Sure.
In a sense. But so in that sense, it becomes a sort of difficult to discern, most people don't, think that technology is sort of becoming the replacement. So versus just allowing them to be extended in their ability or their capability. And I think that's a tricky thing to know how to discern. And I do think that that does require a whole lot of attention. That it makes me wonder if it's I think that there's an interesting question of the possibility of that attention. Because, for example, technology also can, while it might be able to give us some skills that we maybe otherwise wouldn't have in terms of let's just say, I don't know that this is a skill per se, but taking in a lot of different information, let's say, or you're seeing a lot more than you usually would see before it, just because media is such a big part of our new technologies. Technologies are so visual in the sense of giving us images and information and stuff like this, and so yeah, that might be something that could possibly cultivate some sort of skill psychologically or something like this, but the trade-off is that we may also have very low attention spans, for example. So to cultivate attention in lacking attention, we basically using technologies on the regular make us maybe less inclined towards knowing how to pay attention, and we're obviously, if we can't see it, how do we even know to pay attention to it,
Oh, yeah.
So I think one, just kind of the humility, and I think Ivan Illich's work does this, where there's kind of this humility to realize, okay, there's actually might be more going on here than I realize or than I can see or understand, and yeah, just thinking about how do you actually cultivate the openness to that?
Yeah, well, that's, the ability to kind of be able to assess and pay attention to yourself. As an example, let's say you move from banking to online banking. In one way you would go, oh my gosh, that's really convenient, that's wonderful, I don't have to go to the bank anymore. But did you notice that you don't see that older gentleman that runs the farm down the street as much anymore? Did you notice that you don't stop in the diner on the corner as much anymore? Yeah, because if you don't have a reason to go to the bank, you don't run into those people. You don't see them as much. And the more and more you get conveniences, the less and less reason you might have to go out, which then reduces happenstance encounters or just regular encounters with people. Now, maybe that's all worth it. Mm-hmm. But have you noticed that change has occurred? That kind of noticing, when we talk about phenomenology, did you notice that shift has occurred?
Right.
Is that a shift you want? Are you happy? Are you doing things to make up for it? There are things you have to notice have changed because of technology that you easily don't notice.
I think people don't want to notice things sometimes, though, because it could say something there can be a really great concern from for the ego in terms of actually noticing anything. Sure. Because I guess what I mean to say is why is it that people may not necessarily notice? One, yes, it's just kind of I didn't really pay attention to that or didn't take the time to do that, right? But there's another thing where I do wonder if it has something to do with like some sort of protection of the ego a little bit, because you, in a way, like anytime that sort of something's being drawn to attention, it's very easy to not really want to hear what exactly that is, because if you do, it might mean that sometimes people can feel very much like it's just always in the arena of attention or awareness being about like something they're doing wrong.
Sure.
And I think it's what needs to happen is more so an ability to hold space for the awareness itself and the attention itself. Not so much of feeling like, I'm being, like, for example, this idea of, okay, not stopping by to see certain things you usually would if you didn't use certain technologies. It's not so much to start to get into like, oh, well, are you saying I'm like wrong for using this technology? Sure. Or, sort of shame, blame kind of area. I think that like that is an area though where it almost makes it even more difficult to cultivate attention and awareness, because it's so easy to just think that if an attention is being, like, if something's being brought to someone's attention, that it's like this is somehow a judgment, and it might not be. It's just simply a trying to bring awareness around something, not in a sense of judgment. And I think that's very hard, because as humans we all can kind of get like uncomfortable with something, with attention or awareness brought around something that we can't see, because obviously, or something that we haven't maybe noticed or thought mattered, right? Because it's like, well, if it did truly matter, then obviously I would see, what are you saying, I'm stupid? You know what I mean? Like, or you're almost, it's almost like people can only automatically take it, or it's difficult not to take it automatically, like that's saying something about your, like, one's capacity, right? Because it's like if it's a problem, I would just see it and know it to be as well, or whatever, Does that make sense? So I think that it's really, because I'm interested in why is it that noticing things is so difficult, and it's so difficult for all humans, because again, like we talk about in our course description, you don't know what you don't know, and you can't know everything to be human.
No, I mean, it's a very good point that you're bringing up, and I think first it speaks to Martha Nussbaum's book, The Fragility of Goodness, on, she's basically arguing that democracy without the category of tragedy is doomed, because if people can't think of trade-offs between competing goods, well then democracy is over. It's just problem and solutions, and the truth of the matter is the most complicated decisions that become more complex under globalization and pluralism require trade-offs, not good or bad. And basically what technology does is present trade-offs. And if we don't even have the category in our mind to think trade-offs, which like Martha, her whole point is we don't. We're not taught this. We're not taught to think in terms of trade-offs. So then when you draw like the bank example to people's minds, the only way they can compute it is precisely as you're saying they did something wrong. I think a way it protects the ego is it protects the ego from choice, though. Like if you say, hey, have you noticed this trade-off? Then the person has to choose the trade-off as opposed to simply do it. And that then makes it existential.
But also they could be made to feel bad that they made a certain choice. And it's like, well, I don't want that. That feels uncomfortable. So I'm just going to not notice that. Or I'm just not going to be aware of that. I'm just not going to pay attention to that. And so therefore not letting oneself like be open to something that could destabilize.
Well, that exactly, because tragedy, if the world is full of tragedies, the world is full of choices. And choices are terrifying.
And people genuinely make different choices on the same thing, and it's not as
But that's hard to live with.
And that's not as if it,
It's very hard to live with difference.
But it's very hard not to think of it as just good and bad, right and wrong. Yeah. I'm, people feeling like they're in the wrong, when it's not really so much about that as much as it is about trying to bring awareness around what is actually happening, what is the actual result, what are the fruits of that, what are not the fruits of that, and thinking about the trade-offs of different choices. And I think that's very challenging, because it's just either somebody's always seemingly paying too much attention to something that's not really, doesn't really matter to the other person, or vice versa, right? And it's like that's challenging.
Well, I mean, one of the problems we have in the study of history is that history is now read like a melodrama, good versus evil. It's never that. When nations go to like go to war or conflict. It's all these mixtures of intentions and good and bad. But we basically, history is read as a melodrama. And, literature that's a melodrama tends to be quite bad. Well, if you think of life purely in terms of good or bad, you actually are toward life phenomenologically as a melodrama. And this is very inadequate. It's not going to, well, it protects the ego because it protects it from anxiety and choice. And also, it protects you from really, really having to think in a way that takes seriously things like self-deception or possibly being afflicted or being manipulated by the system. I mean, the moment you say the system might manipulate you, and not say it in a kind of trite, repeating the 24/7 news, but no, in a real deep sense, like Ivan Illich is encouraging you to, well, everything changes now. Like, you really, really have to be an active participant in your life. And that's very, very existential.
Yeah, I think that's very true and well said. I think two things came to mind. One is that I think there also needs to be able to, like, again, be a self-reflectiveness and an ability to have conversation around certain things, because otherwise, it's like you never have the opportunity to cultivate anything if it's just, okay, well, I'm not even going to think about that or go there. Now, the risk to that is, the news is always telling you kind of what you should be thinking about. Yeah. And there's a propensity to be like, well, in what way are we talking about awareness and attention? Because somebody could be like, well, if you're not taking a stand on something going on in the world right now, like, then you're not actually open to having an awareness or noticing that, sure. Right? So I think that's the thing where it can get very, and I know, like, in our work we talk a lot about the human journey, or like the common life concept, and I think that's very helpful because it centers it around, like, who are the actual people you encounter and engage with every single day. What are the actual things you can do? What are you putting your hands to? What are you making? What are you sharing? What are you receiving? All of those things that then are like, let's get back to, like, the actual reality you can impact. Because I think what's challenging is that the news is always telling us to pay attention to things. Yes. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't, or that we should be oblivious, or we shouldn't care. No. But you also have to get very realistic with yourself. Like, are you getting on a plane to go somewhere and do something? Yes. Because if you are, wonderful. If you're not, then it's okay to like live in your own moment and present. And I think there's something about this, like, very difficult position that it puts people in, where you're kind of always on high alert, where it's like there's all these things going on. You feel like a horrible person to not do anything, but can you do anything? Like, you got your job, like, can you even afford tickets to go anywhere, like, to help if you wanted to on the ground help people? Like, it's tricky, with that, because I guess this brings an awareness about awareness. Like, it's not just that awareness itself is like, and we've talked about this too, where that's also, like, not the only thing you can do. Like, if you're aware of a problem but you never do anything to solve it, then, like, that's not, like, that's, you kind of undercut the power of awareness by not putting some action to it and, like, some responsibility and, like, care, But anyways, the whole point of why I'm saying all of this is, this idea of being okay. Like, there's a type of, I think there's almost like a type of, I don't know, but I wonder if there's almost this ability, like this inability for anyone to feel like okay with just what they're doing, Absolutely. Instead of always thinking about what they could be doing, what they should be doing. And then also in line with that, like, this kind of also comes to, like, the absolute choice, but that's where, it can kind of feel like you being able to be okay with yourself, right, existentially, and not going and helping some cause that is actually very meaningful. Like, there's some, I don't know, to me, it's just, I feel like every modern person is undergoes this on, like, a regular basis, and it's quite problematic, because, that ability to be, like, just, but the extreme is just to kind of not care at all and sort of not deal with the tension at all and just sort of be honestly just kind of selfish, you know what I'm saying? So it's strange. I do think that, like, I don't know, it makes me think a lot about, like, Neil Postman and all his thoughts on the news, but
well, so a few things. First, it should be noted that techno-capitalism, if we use that phrase, benefits from us not thinking in terms of trade-offs.
Yeah.
Because if we think good, bad, use technology, life is convenient, good, you don't question how you use it and you just kind of go along with it.
Right.
So there is there's a corporate interest, possibly, and it benefits from people basically not being aware of the use of things because, you're probably going to use it if it's a technology that increases convenience. And if you're not, and if the only options are good or bad, well, it's good, and then you don't question the narrative of progress. And it really should be noted as well, Illich over and over again says he's not anti-technology, but it's basically impossible to believe him if you only have good and bad as the options. You're like,
right.
Okay, Illich,
okay,
buddy. But sophisticated thinkers like that are thinking in terms of trade-offs. You could really argue that a sign of sophisticated thinking is the ability to think in trade-offs and to make a decision. That's the issue. We think, thinking without decision is not thinking, in a way. But most of school, and Illich was very critical of the modern school system, and this is partly why, is it's information that never has to be translated into choice. And you see, that is not really education. That,
right.
Education has to translate into what Hegel calls the concrete, or it's just an abstraction. And it's probably disembodying, creates anxiety and stuff like that.
Yeah, not to jump in, but I definitely think there's something that's almost like this libidinal affront. Because, for example, there's always a screen, between you and everything you want to try to conceptualize and actually do. And it's almost like this, you see it, you feel the power, that powerful feeling rise up in you of maybe righteous anger
Sure.
or whatever, and then you just are you feel impotent to do anything.
Yes.
And it's very it's very disembodying in a sense. And I think there's a lot of almost, to me, it does sort of, I don't know, there's just something kind of it's hard not for it to suddenly become a type of almost frustration, almost
Yes.
how a sexual frustration might be
Yes.
felt.
Yes.
Because of that kind of inability to access. It's always a screen there. It's this constant sort of, blockage to being able to actually engage in what you see and what you witness and what you're provoked by.
Well, the other divine individuals who are doing a class is Owen
yes.
and Joshua on Paul Virilio, and we had that chat on Virilio. But you really, really, really need to read Virilio and Ivan Illich together because they're both. I'm not ready to put the flag down and say Paul Virilio is in the counter-modern Enlightenment because there's a technical definition of what that means, a critique of Kantian metaphysics without assuming Kantian metaphysics. At the same time, his entire thinking is completely about the terrain of techno-capitalism that speaks to this disablement, where you are disabled and frustrated and you're constantly in a state of emergency, as they talk about, recently Joshua and Owen were talking about that. And you're always in a state of emergency that never feels like it ends. And it's always just going from one thing to the next. So there's a kind of frustration that's probably going to end in apathy and numbing. And once it does, the system wins. This is the other thing, Ivan Illich, where you could probably draw Virilio into and Illich into conversation is on the idea of disablement. That he's all about. And Virilio's describing this constant disablement that occurs when you're overloaded with information, like his extraordinary book, The Information Bomb. And what ends up happening is you're constantly overwhelmed with information, and then that same system that overwhelms you with, this is where you would put Illich and Virilio together, the same system that overwhelms you with information also makes you incapable.
Yeah, and I think that's Illich's, the way he talks about kind of the disabling is really, really so key because